Girl rescued unloved dog from market. Just watch what the dog does next. The marketplace was alive with noise and color. Vendors shouted over one another, hawking everything from ripe fruit to hand-woven baskets. The air smelled of spices, roasted peanuts, and freshly baked bread. Emily weaved through the crowd, her small hands clutching the strap of her worn canvas bag. She loved these weekend trips with her parents, though they often let her wander a little to explore on her own. It was a chance to soak in the sights and sounds of the busy world outside their quiet neighborhood. As she passed a stall selling scarves, Emily's gaze landed on a post near the edge of the market. At first, she thought the large, dark shape tethered to it was a pile of discarded cloth. Then it moved, a weak shuffle of fur and bone, and she froze. A dog, thin and hunched, was tied there with a fraying rope. Its ribs jutted out beneath a tangle of matted fur. A closer look revealed its tail tucked tightly under its body and ears flattened against its head. Emily approached slowly, her heart twisting at the sight. The dog lifted its head just enough to meet her gaze. Its eyes were dark pools of fear, and it let out a low, warning growl. She stopped a few feet away, crouching low to make herself less threatening. From her bag, she pulled out the remains of a sandwich her mom had packed for her, a thick slice of bread smeared with peanut butter. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, breaking off a piece. "You look like you could use this more than I can." The dog stiffened as she extended the food, nostrils flaring. Its growl faded into a hesitant whine, and after a long moment, it leaned forward just enough to snatch the bread from her fingers. Emily smiled as she watched it gulp down the small offering, crumbs clinging to its wet nose. "You're so brave," she whispered. "Like a hero." She stayed crouched there for a while, talking quietly to the dog as it eyed her warily. She noticed every detail. The way its fur was clumped with dirt, the patch of raw skin on its flank, the way its legs trembled as if standing were an effort. Someone had clearly tied it here and left it. For how long, she couldn't guess. What she did know was that no one seemed to care. Emily felt a surge of anger and sadness. This wasn't right. The dog needed help. She reached a tentative hand toward its head, but it flinched back with a sharp yelp, teeth flashing. She withdrew her hand quickly, her heart aching. "It's okay," she murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you," as if to prove it. She tore off another piece of bread and placed it on the ground before retreating a step. The dog hesitated, then crept forward to eat. Emily smiled again. She decided then and there to call him Thor. He needed a name that symbolized strength and survival, like the hero in her favorite mythology book. Thor. It suited him perfectly. A familiar voice broke through her thoughts. "Emily, there you are." Her mother, laden with shopping bags, hurried toward her with a mix of relief and mild exasperation. Her father followed close behind, his expression softening when he saw Emily crouched near the dog. "Mom, Dad," Emily said urgently, standing up. "We have to do something. Look at him." Her parents exchanged a glance. Her mom frowned. "Oh, honey, that poor thing. He's scared and hungry," Emily pressed, her voice trembling with emotion. "We can't just leave him here." Her father bent down to examine the dog from a distance. "Looks like he's been through a lot, but, Emily, we don't know anything about him. He could be dangerous." "He's not dangerous," Emily insisted. "He's just scared. Someone hurt him, I know it. Please, we can't leave him like this." Her mother sighed. "Sweetheart, it's not as simple as just taking him home. He might belong to someone. Then why is he tied up and abandoned?" Emily shot back, her frustration bubbling over. "Look at him. He's sick, and no one here is helping. We can't just walk away." Her parents hesitated, clearly torn. Emily's father rubbed the back of his neck, while her mother glanced around as if hoping for someone else to step in. Finally, her dad spoke. "All right, let's see if we can find the market manager. Maybe they know who left the dog here." Emily nodded eagerly, hope sparking in her chest. She stayed close to Thor as her parents made inquiries. keeping her voice low and soothing whenever a passerby startled him. It didn't take long for the answer to come back. No one had claimed the dog. The manager suspected it had been abandoned the night before. Armed with this information, Emily's parents agreed to take Thor to the local veterinarian. They borrowed a blanket from one of the stalls and gently coaxed the dog onto it, using it as a makeshift stretcher. Thor resisted at first, but Emily's calm voice and gentle reassurances seemed to work, and he eventually allowed them to carry him to their car. At the clinic, the veterinarian confirmed what Emily already suspected. Thor was severely underweight, dehydrated, and covered in flea bites. There were old scars on his body, evidence of past injuries, and the vet noted that his fearful behavior suggested a history of abuse. Emily's parents listened somberly as the vet explained the care Thor would need to recover. It would take time, patience, and no small amount of effort. Emily didn't hesitate. "We'll do it," she said firmly, looking up at her parents with determined eyes. "We'll help him." Her father squeezed her shoulder. "We'll do our best," he agreed. As they drove home that evening, Thor lay curled in the back seat on the blanket, his breathing slow and steady. Emily watched him, her heart swelling with a mix of sadness and hope. She reached out cautiously, resting her hand on the edge of the blanket. This was just the beginning, she knew. Thor had a long way to go, but she was ready for the journey. Thor's first night in their home was tense. He barely moved from the corner of the living room where Emily had set up a soft bed lined with blankets. His body remained curled tightly, his head resting on his paws as he watched the family with wary eyes. Emily tried not to take it personally when he flinched at her every attempt to approach him. He didn't bark or growl. He simply shrank back, his trembling frame a testament to the fear that still gripped him. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor a few feet away from him, her voice quiet and soothing. "You're safe now, Thor. Promise. No one's going to hurt you anymore." She placed a small plate of cooked chicken nearby before leaning back, careful not to make any sudden movements. Thor sniffed the air but didn't move, his eyes darting between the plate and her face. Her parents gave her space, checking in occasionally but trusting her instincts. They had seen this side of Emily before, this unwavering patience, the kind she had learned from her late grandfather. He had been a gentle soul who always seemed to have a way with animals. Emily could still remember afternoons spent in his garden, where he taught her how to coax birds closer with crumbs or nurse a wounded squirrel back to health. "Animals can sense your intentions," he'd said once, his voice full of quiet wisdom. "If you're calm and kind, they'll feel it." Those memories gave Emily strength now. She didn't mind the hours spent simply sitting near Thor, her presence quiet but constant. She read books aloud to him, letting her voice fill the silence, or hummed softly while sketching in her notebook. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Little by little, Thor began to relax. He stopped trembling as much and would occasionally shift his position to watch her more closely. The breakthrough came one afternoon when Emily extended her hand with a small treat and held it steady, her heart thudding with anticipation. Thor hesitated for what felt like forever, his nose twitching as he considered the offering. Finally, he leaned forward and gently took the treat from her fingers. Emily felt a swell of triumph and joy so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "Good boy, Thor," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For the first time, his tail gave a tentative wag. From that moment, their bond began to grow. Thor still had his fears. He flinched at loud noises and avoided strangers, but he trusted Emily. She celebrated every small victory. The first time he followed her into the backyard, the day he let her brush the tangles out of his fur, the moment he brought her a ball during a play session. Each milestone felt like a step forward, a piece of his broken spirit mending under her care. One afternoon, as they played together in the yard, Emily tossed the ball toward a patch of tall grass. Thor bolted after it, his movements clumsy but full of energy. When he returned, tail wagging and ball in his mouth, Emily laughed and praised him. She tossed the ball again, this time toward a chair that had been left overturned from earlier. Thor surprised her by leaping over the obstacle with an ease that seemed almost instinctive. He landed gracefully and turned back to her, his eyes bright with excitement. "Thor!" Emily exclaimed, clapping her hands. "That was amazing!" She threw the ball again, this time guiding it toward a small stack of boxes. Once again, Thor cleared them effortlessly. Emily's eyes widened as she watched him. It wasn't just luck. Thor had a natural agility that seemed to shine through in these moments of joy. That evening, as she sat with her parents at the dinner table, she couldn't stop talking about Thor's newfound talent. "He's incredible," she said. Her fork paused midair. "You should have seen him jump. It was like he's been doing it his whole life." Her father chuckled. "Maybe he has. You never know what his past might have been like." Emily frowned, the thought dampening her excitement. Thor's past remained a mystery, one she was reluctant to dwell on too much. Still, the flashes of his potential gave her hope for the future. "I think we should try training him," she said finally. "Not just for fun, but, I don't know, maybe it could help him build confidence." Her mother smiled. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, Emily, but remember to take it slow. He's still healing." "I will," Emily promised. Over the next few days, she began introducing simple exercises into their playtime. She set up makeshift obstacles in the yard, small hurdles made from broomsticks balanced on buckets, tunnels crafted from old blankets draped over chairs. Thor approached the new challenges cautiously at first, but Emily's encouragement kept him going. Every time he completed a task, she showered him with praise and gentle pats, his tail wagging furiously in response. The changes in Thor were subtle but undeniable. His once hunched posture began to straighten, and his movements grew more confident. He still had moments of hesitation, especially around unfamiliar people or sudden noises, but his trust in Emily seemed unshakable. She could see it in the way he looked at her, his dark eyes soft and full of gratitude. One evening, as Emily sat on the floor beside him, she rested her hand on his back and felt him lean into her touch. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Thor was no longer the frightened, trembling dog she had found tied to a post. He was still healing, but he was learning to trust, to hope, and to find joy in the world again. And as Emily looked into his eyes, she knew she would do whatever it took to help him continue on this journey. Emily's mornings began earlier than usual these days. As soon as the sun peeked over the horizon, she'd slip into her sneakers, grab Thor's leash, and head to the backyard. Thor greeted these sessions with an eagerness that warmed her heart, his tail wagging furiously as he trotted alongside her. What started as simple obedience training, sitting, staying, and coming when called, quickly evolved into something more. Thor's enthusiasm for learning and his natural agility made every session exciting. Emily had set up a modest training course using whatever she could find around the house. Broomsticks balanced on crates became hurdles. A row of garden stakes stuck into the ground served as weaving poles, and an old tire propped up with rope acted as a jump ring. Thor approached each new challenge with a mix of curiosity and determination. He stumbled a few times in the beginning, knocking over poles or hesitating before a jump, but Emily's constant encouragement kept him going. "That's it, Thor. Good boy!" She cheered as he successfully navigated the poles for the first time, his body twisting and turning with remarkable precision. Thor's ears perked up at her praise, his chest puffing slightly, as if he understood he'd done something amazing. As the weeks passed, Thor's skills grew more refined. He leaped over higher hurdles with ease, bounded through the tire like it was second nature, and completed the entire course in record time. His intelligence and agility shone brightly, leaving Emily in awe of his potential. She began to wonder if he might have been trained for something similar in his past, though the thought of what he might have endured before made her heart ache. One afternoon, after Thor completed a flawless run of the course, Emily crouched down to hug him, burying her face in his thick fur. "You're incredible, Thor. You know that." Thor responded by licking her cheek, his tail wagging so hard it thumped against the ground. The idea came to her that evening as she scrolled through her phone, idly searching for local events. She stumbled upon a flyer for an upcoming pet fair at the community park. The event promised activities for pets, including an agility showcase. What caught Emily's attention, though, was its focus on fostering pet adoption awareness. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to share Thor's story and show everyone how far he'd come. "Mom, Dad," she called, rushing into the kitchen where her parents were cleaning up after dinner. "Look at this." She handed her phone to her dad, her excitement bubbling over. "There's a pet fair next weekend, and they're doing an agility showcase. Thor could compete." Her father raised an eyebrow, glancing at her mother. "What do you think?" Her mother smiled. "I think it's a wonderful idea. Thor's worked so hard, and it sounds like a great way to show everyone how special he is." Emily beamed. "You'll come, right? Both of you." "Wouldn't miss it," her father said, ruffling her hair. The days leading up to the fair were filled with preparation. Emily spent extra time perfecting Thor's routine, adding small flourishes like sharp turns and quick starts to impress the judges. Thor seemed to sense the importance of their work, his focus sharper and his energy boundless. Meanwhile, Thor's protective instincts began to emerge in small but meaningful ways. One night, as the family sat in the living room, Thor suddenly stood up, his ears pricked and body tense. Moments later, the doorbell rang, startling everyone. It was a delivery driver, dropping off a package, but the encounter left Emily's parents marveling at Thor's keen awareness. "Good boy, Thor," her father said, giving him a pat. "You're looking out for us, aren't you?" Emily smiled, feeling a swell of pride. Thor wasn't just her dog. He was becoming an integral part of their family. The day of the pet fair arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze. The park buzzed with activity, vendors setting up booths and families milling about with their pets. Emily's parents set up a small picnic spot near the agility course while Emily led Thor to the check-in tent. He walked confidently beside her, his tail wagging as he took in the sights and smells around him. When their turn came, Emily guided Thor to the starting line. Her heart raced as she crouched beside him, her hand resting on his back. "You've got this, Thor," she whispered. He looked up at her, his dark eyes shining with trust. The whistle blew, and they were off. Thor bounded over the hurdles with ease, his movements fluid and graceful. He weaved through the poles without missing a step, his focus unwavering. The crowd clapped and cheered as he soared through the tire and darted toward the finish line. Emily ran beside him, her laughter bubbling up as they crossed together. The judges were impressed, praising Thor's speed and precision. "He's a natural," one of them said, jotting down notes. Emily beamed, her heart swelling with pride. As they made their way back to her parents, a voice called out behind them, "Hey, that's my dog." Emily froze, her hand tightening on Thor's leash. A man was approaching, his face lined and weathered, his eyes narrowing as he pointed at Thor. "That's my dog," he repeated, his tone sharp. Emily's parents quickly stepped between them, her father holding up a hand. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. This is our dog." "No mistake," the man snapped. "I've been looking for him. He ran off months ago. Now hand him over." Thor's body tensed, his tail tucking under as he pressed closer to Emily. She instinctively crouched beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "He's not yours," she said firmly. "You abandoned him. He was starving and scared when we found him." The man sneered. "You don't know what you're talking about, kid. He's mine and I want him back." Emily's mother stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "We're not going to hand him over without proof. If you have any documents showing ownership, we'll be happy to discuss this further. Until then, we're leaving." The man glared at them but didn't follow as they turned away. Emily's heart pounded as she held Thor close, whispering reassurances into his ear. Her parents exchanged worried glances, but her father placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll figure this out." As they packed up their things and headed home, Emily couldn't shake the man's face from her mind. She knew this wasn't over, But one thing was certain. She would do whatever it took to protect Thor. The days following the confrontation at the pet fair were tense. Emily could sense the unease in her parents, even though they tried their best to reassure her. The man's claim to Thor had shaken them all, but Emily's resolve remained firm. She couldn't imagine life without Thor, not after all they'd been through together. Thor, for his part, seemed oblivious to the tension. He stayed close to Emily, his trust in her evident in every glance and wag of his tail. It wasn't long before the man's threats became official. A letter arrived in the mail, demanding the return of Thor and accusing Emily's family of theft. Emily's parents sat her down to discuss the situation, their voices calm but serious. "Emily, we need to fight this the right way," her father said. "We'll get a lawyer and present our case. But it might not be easy." Emily nodded, her jaw set. "I'll do whatever it takes. He's not just a dog to me. He's family." The first step was gathering evidence. Emily's parents contacted the veterinarian who had treated Thor, requesting copies of the records that detailed his poor condition when they found him. Emily also went back to the marketplace where she had first seen Thor. With the help of the market manager, she tracked down the vendor whose stall had been near the post where Thor was tied. The vendor, an elderly man with kind eyes, remembered the day vividly. "That poor dog looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks," he said. "I'll tell the court what I saw if it helps." Back home, their neighbor Mrs. Clark, a retired schoolteacher, offered another piece of crucial information. She had seen the man around town before and recognized him from the description Emily gave. "He's no stranger to neglect," she said grimly. "I've heard stories about the way he's treated his animals." "You're doing the right thing, Emily." Encouraged by the support, Emily and her parents met with a lawyer to prepare their case. The lawyer, a soft-spoken woman named Ms. Ramirez, listened carefully as they recounted Thor's story. She assured them they had a strong case, especially with the veterinary records and potential witness testimonies. "The court will look at the evidence and decide what's in Thor's best interest," she said. "It's clear he's thriving with you, and that will work in your favor." When the day of the hearing arrived, Emily felt a mixture of nerves and determination. The courthouse was imposing, its tall columns casting long shadows in the morning light. Thor wasn't allowed inside, so Emily hugged him tightly before they left him with a trusted neighbor. "I'll be back soon," she whispered into his fur. "I promise." Inside the courtroom, the man who claimed to be Thor's former owner sat with his own lawyer, his expression smug and confident. Emily sat between her parents, clutching her hands tightly in her lap. Ms. Ramirez opened their case by presenting the veterinary records, detailing Thor's malnutrition, flea infestation, and other signs of neglect. She followed this with photographs of Thor taken on the day Emily found him, his gaunt frame and fearful demeanor starkly visible. The man's lawyer countered by arguing that while Thor's condition had been poor, it was not due to neglect but rather the man's inability to care for him during a difficult financial period. The man himself spoke next, claiming he had loved Thor and had been searching for him ever since he went missing. "He's my dog," the man insisted, his tone defensive. "I never meant for him to suffer. I just want him back." Emily felt her anger rise, but she kept her composure. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger as she recounted the day she found Thor. She described his fear, his frailty, and how he had flinched at every movement. She talked about the hours she spent earning his trust and the joy of seeing him heal and grow confident. "He's not just a dog to me," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "He's my best friend. I don't know what kind of life he had before, but I know what kind of life he has now. He's safe, he's loved, and he's happy. Please don't take that away from him." Ramirez followed Emily's testimony by calling their witnesses. The market vendor spoke about the day Thor was found, describing the dog's pitiful condition and the lack of care he had clearly endured. The veterinarian testified about Thor's health at the time of his initial checkup, emphasizing the signs of long-term neglect. Each testimony added weight to their case, painting a clear picture of the life Thor had escaped. The judge listened carefully, asking questions to clarify the details. When both sides had presented their arguments, there was a long silence as the judge reviewed the evidence. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her hands gripping the edge of the bench as she waited for the decision. Finally, the judge spoke. In cases like these, the primary concern is the well-being of the animal. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that Thor was in poor condition when he was found and has since thrived under the care of the Robinson family. Additionally, the testimonies provided suggest a history of neglect on the part of the plaintiff. Therefore, I rule in favor of the Robinson family. Thor will remain in their care. Emily felt a rush of relief and joy as the words sank in. Her parents hugged her tightly, their faces lit with smiles. Across the courtroom, the man glared but said nothing as he gathered his things and left. When they returned home, Emily ran straight to Thor, dropping to her knees to embrace him. He wagged his tail furiously, licking her face as if sensing her excitement. "You're staying with us?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're home for good." That night, as the family sat together in the living room, Thor sprawled contentedly at Emily's feet. Her parents looked at her with pride, their faith in her unwavering determination rewarded. Thor wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a symbol of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bond they shared. The day after the court ruling, the house was filled with a quiet sense of relief and joy. Thor moved through the rooms with his usual grace, his tail wagging slightly as if he could feel the lifted weight in the air. Emily couldn't stop smiling, even as she went about her usual routines. Every glance at Thor filled her with gratitude. He was theirs truly and forever. The news of the court decision spread quickly through the small town. Neighbors stopped by to offer congratulations, their kind words and warm smiles affirming what Emily had always known. Thor was special. Mrs. Clark brought over a batch of homemade cookies and patted Thor on the head. "You're a good boy," she said with a chuckle, watching as he leaned into her touch. "This town could learn a thing or two from you." It wasn't just Emily's family who felt the ripple effects of Thor's story. A few days later, the local newspaper ran an article detailing the court case and the journey that had brought Thor into Emily's life. The piece highlighted not only Thor's transformation but also the importance of recognizing and addressing animal neglect. Emily's mother had sent in before and after photos of Thor, and they were printed side by side, a stark reminder of the cruelty he had endured and the love that had brought him back to life. The article inspired a wave of support. The town's animal shelter reported an increase in adoptions, with several families citing Thor's story as their motivation. "If Thor can find a second chance, so can these animals," one woman said as she picked out a Shih Terrier mix. Emily felt a swell of pride every time she heard about another animal finding a home. Thor wasn't just her hero. He was becoming a hero to the entire community. Thor's former owner wasn't forgotten, either. The court had ruled not only in favor of Emily's family, but also held the man accountable for his neglect. He was charged with multiple counts of animal cruelty and faced fines as well as a ban on owning pets. The community, outraged by his actions, rallied to ensure that the charges were taken seriously. Letters poured into the courthouse, urging authorities to set an example by holding him accountable. As the weeks passed, the town decided to honor Thor and Emily's journey in a way that brought everyone together. Plans for a small parade began to take shape, organized by the same community members who had supported Emily during the trial. At first, Emily felt shy about the idea. It wasn't about her, after all, but her parents encouraged her to embrace the moment. "This is a celebration of everything you and Thor have accomplished," her father said. "You both deserve it." The day of the parade dawned bright and sunny, with just enough breeze to keep the air fresh. The streets were lined with neighbors, their faces lit with excitement. Children waved handmade signs with phrases like, "Thor the Brave," and "Heroes come in all shapes." Vendors handed out balloons shaped like dogs, and the scent of popcorn filled the air. Emily walked beside Thor at the front of the parade, her heart swelling with pride as the crowd cheered. Thor, wearing a bright red bandana around his neck, trotted confidently beside her. His ears perked up at the sound of applause, and he occasionally wagged his tail at familiar faces. Behind them, floats decorated with colorful streamers showcased local rescue animals and volunteers from the animal shelter. As they reached the town square, Emily was invited to say a few words. She hesitated for a moment, nervous about speaking in front of so many people, but the sight of Thor sitting calmly beside her gave her courage. Taking the microphone, she smiled and began to speak. "Thor's story isn't just about him or me," she said, her voice steady. "It's about what happens when we choose kindness and compassion. Thor was abandoned and scared, but with love and patience, he's become the amazing dog you see today. I hope his story inspires all of us to care for animals, to speak up when we see neglect, and to believe in second chances." The crowd erupted into applause, and Emily felt her cheeks flush. Thor barked once, as if adding his own endorsement to her words, and the laughter that followed eased her nerves. She knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears. "You did good, buddy," she whispered. That evening, after the festivities had ended and the house had grown quiet, Emily and Thor settled into their usual spot in the living room. She pulled out her sketchbook and began to draw, her pencil capturing the day's highlights: the parade, the signs, the smiles of the children who had petted Thor. He lay beside her, his head resting on her lap, his breathing slow and steady. As she sketched, Emily reflected on everything that had brought them to this moment. Thor's arrival in her life had been unexpected, but it had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She thought about the lessons he had taught her: patience, resilience, and the power of unconditional love. He had shown her that even in the face of pain and fear, healing was possible. Her final drawing was of Thor standing tall, his red bandana fluttering in the wind, a proud and hopeful expression on his face. She smiled as she added the last strokes, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had shared. As the moon rose outside, casting a soft glow over the room, Emily set her sketchbook aside and leaned back against the couch. Thor shifted closer, his body warm against hers. She rested her hand on his back, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. In that quiet moment, she knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together. They were, after all, a team, a girl and her dog, bound by a bond that nothing could break. The story of Thor is more than just the journey of a rescued dog. It is a lesson in patience, compassion, and the power of hope. Emily's determination teaches us that with kindness and a resolute heart, we can turn past scars into opportunities for new beginnings. This story reminds us that every living being deserves love and protection, and that simple acts of goodness can change a life. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to catch more meaningful stories. See you in the next video.